All right, where do we leave off yesterday? Because today we're going to get into Ezra's going to show up today. Yeah, at some point, Ezra's going to come along. And we left off with the fact that God had orchestrated things through the work of the angels to where politically they had brought an imposter to the throne of Persia who panicked when he started losing control of his empire, which historians record that there were outbreaks all over the outskirts of the empire and nations were rebelling. And when he gets this letter from these folks down in the area of Israel, and it says that these Jews are rebuilding the walls and it's a rebellious city, he panics, he sends his army and shuts down the work of the temple. And it ended. It had been about 15 years they've been working on it so far. And now the work on the temple has stopped. So that's where you are right now. You're at this period right in here where the work on the temple had stopped, which is somewhere around 522, although those dates are so flexible, it's not really, the dates aren't near as important as maybe the red lines where you're keeping track of kings' reigns and where we were in those kings. So that's where we left off. So Ezra 5, here's where God steps in and helps those who really wanted to get it going again. And this is where in ecclesial life, we have to have people scattered through the ecclesia, younger people that are coming up that get excited about getting back to work, trying something again that maybe for years just didn't work and they didn't get it finished. And the younger people can rise up and say, let's give it another try. And so what you have then is the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, they prophesied to the Jews. And they talked about God working in this, God wanting them to get back to work. And so Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jozadak, rose up and began to build the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them, helping them. And isn't it wonderful that when we give up, our God doesn't? He does stir up the spirits of people that keep trying, keep trying. And when some of us get tired and older and we feel like we've worked on something for a while and it just isn't working, new people come along and they can carry the torch and get it rolling. And as older folks, we got to realize that don't squash that. Really embrace that enthusiasm of the young and try to support them the best we can of getting the job done. So you go back and you wonder now we have to fit in Haggai's message and Zechariah's message at this point. And you have another look at them within this historical context and try to figure out what was going on. So if you're familiar with Haggai's message, you know that in Haggai chapter 1, Haggai comes in, probably an older fella. He's going to bring in the older perspective to those that are amongst the older group. And he says, all right, let's have a look at how God has influenced your lives. And some of you might do that over the past 2 years with COVID. How have things been going with decisions that you have made in your ecclesia, your families? How have things really been working out? And he points out that, look, you've got small harvests. You've got not enough food to eat or to drink. There's cold temperatures, high inflation, and all this time where you were working on your houses. You turned away from God's house to take care of your stuff and worrying about your stuff and not giving God any time. Look at what you got. Did it really work? Did you really get all those great things you thought you were going to get out of this life? In chapter 1 at verse 11, you find out there was drought and blight and mildew on their crops. And in chapter 1 at verse 9, God blew it away. He just blew it away. All those efforts you put into all the stuff of this world, all those efforts we put into thinking that was going to bring us happiness, God blew it away. And the solution was to get back to work. Get back to working in God's family, in God's house. Get back into your spiritual life. And once they did that, God blessed them. And he promised that he would bless them. This was God's assurance in 1 at verse 13. I am with you. And he stirred up the spirit of the people. And he used Haggai and Zechariah to do that. And he says, don't worry that this temple is not as good as the former one. That's okay. It doesn't matter that this job, and you look at it and you think it's not as good as the last one or the ones in your day and age. It doesn't really matter because God's going to blow it all away anyway. He's going to destroy this temple because he doesn't care about the project. He cares about how we are all involved in the project and how we're treating each other along the way. That's what this is all about, brothers and sisters and young people. It's not about the job. Some of us are so focused on the end result of what we want to get accomplished We fail to realize that what God really cared about was how we treated each other along the way and what we were learning and developing about how to work with people and with our children. That's what God cares about. He can accomplish the project in a moment of time. That's not what he's after. He's after the process of these projects. That's what God cares about. That's why every generation has to grow up and relive some of these things and try it all over again, because they have to go through this process of learning how to work with people, training to become the angels of the new age. So his whole point in Haggai 2 is the nation's unclean, and it's a lot easier to learn wickedness than righteousness. It's tough to have righteousness. It's by default, we just move back towards our bad ways. And you have to actively engage with God's help, working towards spiritual life. And God promised in Haggai chapter 2 that he would bless them. I'll bless you from now on. You watch, from now on, things are going to get better when you get back to work. And that was the promise that he made. And so God did the impossible thing to them at that time. Here, this imposter king had risen up. He shut down the work, brought in an army, made it all stop. They thought it was all over. And in a moment of time, the angels overthrew the imposter. Darius Hystaspes rose up to be the new king, and he allowed them to finish the work. And this was it. And some of the Jews had the spiritual awareness to realize God was providing a little window of opportunity, and they had to jump on it and get with it. And they did. And the angels were so busy trying to accomplish all these political goals, working with the nation of Israel, working with all those other nations. And you'll find in Zechariah's prophecy, you get a window into that of what was really happening. So unity sometimes does require help from God to get it going again. We have to all pray about it. We have to ask God for help, ask him to send his angels to get involved in people's lives and change things that are happening, and so that things can get worked out again, and you try and you try. But it isn't just about our own personal efforts. It's not about me trying harder and harder. It's about relying upon God to get it done. And that's when we turn it over to God, that's when he will work the most. Remember Zechariah's 7 night visions? Some of you are probably familiar with those in Zechariah. Again, some of our Christadelphian writings, you look at the story of Zechariah. I used to wonder as a young person reading through different expositors' writings, our community has a rough time with Zechariah, because a lot of times when you're reading these prophecies of the 7 night visions, you'll find that it was very clearly one of the visions was about the time right now, about Ezra and Nehemiah. That's very clear at Ezra's time right now. And then there's another vision that comes in about carpenters. I'm not sure, well, what do you do with these carpenters or these smiths or whatever it calls them in your version? And then there's another vision about the temple, and you're back to that again. And you'll find some of our writers say, well, this vision was about the past, this one's about the future, this one's about the past, this one's about the future. And it wasn't until I ran across a series of articles in the Testimony magazine by Edward Whitaker that he pointed out that, look, this was like every other prophecy. There was an historical application to all 7 night visions. They were all about this time period of Ezra. And it made so much more sense to realize when you're reading through those, that's what Zechariah is talking about. That's the historical application. And then there may be another application to the future when Christ returns, but there was an historical application. And so you look at what happens in Zechariah, and it brings it to light. In chapter 1, you see this vision of angels coming in on horses. They've been patrolling the earth. And they come back and they report to another angel by the myrtle tree. And they say to him, look, we've been out all over the earth. We brought it back under rest, because Darius Hystaspes, that's what happened the first 2 years. He tried to bring all those areas of the Persian kingdom that had rebelled back under control, get this whole nation back under control. And that is what he did with the help of the angels. And then the angels say, one angel that they reported to, he asked the Lord, he says, look at how long are you going to wait until you have mercy on Jerusalem? This is angels talking to higher angels who in turn talk to God. You realize Zechariah has more about angels than any other Bible book. And a lot of times we read through the story of Zechariah, we don't even notice it. But it's showing you how the angels interact, how God's family actually works. They go out and they do their job. They report back to another angel, like a Michael or a Gabriel. And then in turn, he talks to God and gets like, well, how long is this going to be? They don't know. They do their work. And so the answer comes back, and the angels declared that Jerusalem will be inhabited without any need of walls, because that whole vision in chapter 2 is not future. It's not like you all of a sudden jump to the future like many of our expositors do. It was about this time right now. The people, some of them that were discouraging the work, were saying, we shouldn't be building the temple. We should be building the walls. We need protection. Look at the army came in and they stopped the work, and all this stuff going around the community about we're doing the wrong thing. And God comes back through Zechariah in one night and shows them all these visions. And you can imagine Zechariah coming back to the people the next day. Here's what I saw. There's this, the angels, they're working for us. They care about this project. They can't wait until it's done. And God's promised, don't worry about the walls. He's promised he'll be a wall of fire around us while we're doing this. He's going to protect us. And then the angels say that, look, Jerusalem's going to be inhabited without walls. And then Joshua stands before the angel. Remember that vision in chapter 3 where Joshua's in his dirty clothes and he stands before the angel, and there's Satan standing there to condemn him, probably representing the adversaries. And the promise is that the angel of the Lord says at that moment that the Lord rebuke you, Samaritans. Stop this. And Zechariah comes in and says, look at the angels. Look what they're doing. They're going to stop the adversaries. They've got God convinced. They're on our side. God's going to get this project done. And the word comes down at that point and says, look, Joshua, you're in your dirty rags because you've been building these walls. You've been working on this temple. I promise you, Joshua, that you are going to change your clothes. You're going to put on the high priest royal garments, and you will stand as high priest for this nation in your day. It's all going to happen. And then in chapter 4, you get the stone that's there, and the eyes are on the stone looking at the capstone, the last stone that's ready to go up into the temple that held the whole building together. And there's 7 eyes looking at the stone, and they're watching the stone, waiting for the day when that capstone will go up. And God promises Zerubbabel, you will be there when this temple is finished. And you get that message that comes through that the angels cared more about finishing this project than the people. I found that fascinating. You get that, I don't know whether you realize that, but he says there in Zechariah 4 that the 7 eyes that are watching the capstone, they're rejoicing at this project. They can't wait to get it done. What's your problem? They're working tirelessly through all the political nations, bringing all the events about so that this can happen. What are you doing waiting to get back to work? And that's the message that Zechariah brings, probably a younger fellow, all the enthusiasm that he brought back in. They're watching over the capstone, and they know it's going to go up with shouts of grace, grace to it. By the grace of God, it would go back together. And the angels were rejoicing to see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. And that message comes back, all right, who's despised the day of small things? If the angels are that excited about what's happening in our ecclesias and our families and the political events of this world, who are we to despise a day of small things? Let's get on board and rejoice in the projects that our community is doing, that our young people come up with, and support those things. They're active today the same way. And you can imagine how exciting it is to the angels that the 7,000 years of this creation is almost at an end. That the whole purpose of the creation of Adam and Eve, that the earth would be filled with the glory of God, is coming about soon. And you can imagine the excitement that's there. And they're looking at all of us wondering, why aren't we as excited as they are? They've been working at this for 6,000 years, and now it's finally going to happen. So let's learn to cooperate with that plan, get on board with it, and become excited about it, and never frustrate the work of the angels. So what happens at this point is they get back to work. And so in Ezra 5 at verse 3, you find that Tattenai, the governor of the region beyond the river, and Shether-Boznai and their companions came to them and spoke to them thus, and they said, who has commanded you to build this temple and finish this wall? Then accordingly, we told them the names of the men who were constructing this building. But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, so that they could not make them cease till a report could go up to Persia, up to Darius, and then a written answer was returned concerning this matter. Now, one of the things you'll notice in chapter 5 is that this group of people that goes after them is not near as antagonistic as the groups that you saw back in chapter 4. You don't see lies coming out of these people. They don't argue to the king that they're rebuilding the walls of the city and all those kind of things. This group gives pretty much an honest report and simply asks the king, is this really what you want? They realize the new king's taken over. It's not the imposter that's there anymore. It's a different fellow. And he's not going to be shaken. This guy's in charge. He's in control, and he finds out what's going on. And God was with them this time, and they were going to succeed. So it's been about 16 years now since Cyrus's decree was originally given. So really, in the end, the work on the temple only stopped for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years max, before they got going again. And it's going to be finished now in just 4 years. So one of the interesting things, though, is that God was testing the people as to whether or not the elders, the leadership, are you willing to stand up for the truth? Are you willing to make those good decisions and put yourself on the line? Are you willing to take those risks involved in ecclesial life to get the community going, to support things that are in positive directions? And they took the names down. Imagine that individually, they're writing oh, are you involved in this? What's your name? And oh, you're there. Are you involved in this? What's your name? And they're taking individual names like that, because the challenge was there to find out, are they really willing to stand for this? Are you going to back away and not take personal responsibility for this new direction that it's going? And it happens in our lives too, brothers and sisters. That's what leadership is all about. You realize that we really should get moving in this direction. And true leaders stand up and take those positions and encourage the ecclesia to go with them. And you find the eye of God was upon them. This is the invisible hand of God working behind the scenes. The angels were there backing them, supporting them. And that's what Zechariah came in to tell the people, is that, look, you think this is just us. No. We have this whole host of angels that are behind us, that are helping us. Let's get back to work, and they will support it. And they're more excited about it than you and I. They can't wait to see this project finish. And so the eye of God was upon them as well. So you look then at the Jews' response, and they come back and they say, all right, we're the servants of the God of heaven in verse 11. And we're rebuilding the temple. The temple, that's all this is about, is the temple, not the walls of the city. We're rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and completed. But because our fathers provoked the God of heaven to wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. And they go through this history, and they admit that, look, at the problem was our God did it. Our God took us up to Babylon. Our God ruined the temple. Our God destroyed it. But King Cyrus made a decree. He made a decree 15 years ago and said, we can come back. And he gave us permission to build the house, and told us a few things. He even gave us some of the vessels of the house and so on. So they give this whole history of what would happen. But from that time, even until now, it has been built under construction, and it's not finished. So the Jewish leaders, they took responsibility at this time. They stood up, gave an accurate account of what had happened, and they wait to see what the king's response is going to be this time. And that's sometimes what happens in our lives, brothers and sisters. You're in the middle of a project, and God brings troubles into your life. He brings conflicts. He brings problems, and he's waiting to see whether we trust him through those conflicts. Don't let it discourage us to the point that we back off. And most people, when you back off of ecclesial projects, what you do is you go bury yourself in your job, or you bury yourself in fixing up your own house, or you go find some hobby to get involved in, or you go find some sport, or you take up sailing or something so you can disappear for a while and get out of ecclesial life. And God wanted to see, are they really committed to this? The prophets are out there helping them. And when they had a good response, God worked with it and promised he would get this work done. So they did faithfully witness to God. The Jews accepted the blame. They were honest to the people and the king, and they said, look, it was our fault. This all happened in the first place, that God had brought the captivity, and they refer to Cyrus's decree. So this is when it's going to matter that decree got put into writing. So you look at unity, as we've been looking at this weekend. Unity really does strengthen us to stand strong together against the challenges of this world. When we are unified as a group, as a family, moms and dads, in terms of your own personal family, when there's unity there, you can stand strong together. And that's what these people did. they first of all collapsed because they had given up on the work and they stopped, and God stopped the work. But now the prophets have got them going again. The project's back on track. And this time they stand together and God blesses the work. 4 years, it's done. So if you've ever wondered about Sheshbazzar, who he really is, I think you'll find that in verse 16, it really is the Zerubbabel, because when you go and look at what happened, he is the governor in Ezra 5 at verse 14. In Haggai chapter 1, you find the governor is Zerubbabel. Yes, he mentions in Ezra 5 that he laid the foundation of the temple, which we know was Zerubbabel. So probably they're just different names. There's a Persian name that they had for this fella, and there's a Jewish name down in the land that they refer to him as Zerubbabel, but you'll see both names used. And I think this is what you'll find in the story of Ezra, is sometimes people that were in both areas had different names for the same fellow. So Zerubbabel and Sheshbazzar are probably the same fellow. So you know the story. What happens? They go and the king makes a search. This is Darius the Saspes now. He searches throughout the province. Is there a record of this decree 15 years ago that Cyrus made? And they go around and they look around, and in chapter 6, you find that he issues the decree. The search was made in the archives where the treasuries were stored in Babylon, and at Ecmetha, or Ecbanata, as it's now called today, in the palace of the province of Media, a scroll was found, and on it a record was written thus. So no wonder back in Ezra chapter 1, in the first verse, when Cyrus made his decree, it says it was written, because God made sure it got recorded. And even though some of the libraries didn't have it anymore, they found one up in the northern area up there at Ecbanata, which was the summer residence of the king. And when they read through it and found out what was recorded, it turned out that it supported entirely the idea that Cyrus had given them permission to go back and to build the temple. So if you're wondering where Ecmetha was, it's actually this city up there we call today Ecbanata right there. Some of your Bible versions probably have that. And what the Persian kings would do is during the winter, they would be in the southern area at Susa, the capital, which you'll find like in the story of Esther. And during the summer, when it got really hot, they go up into the higher lands up there at Ecbanata, but they kept records in various spots, and they found the record up there. It was written. When you compare the decrees and you look at them carefully, you'll find out that the one in Ezra 1 referred to Yahweh. The one in Ezra 6 is in Aramaic, and it doesn't. The decree in chapter 1 didn't have any size limits, whereas when it was recorded in Ezra 6, it did. It has limits, of which this temple is a lot smaller than those size limits that are recorded here in chapter 6. The free will offerings are in chapter 1. They're not there in the recording in chapter 6, and paying from the treasury isn't, whereas paying for the treasury is in the one in Ezra chapter 6. So although they're not the same, people wonder whether what happened is that the Cyrus initially issued a decree. Possibly it was modified a little bit later on with the same similar ideas, and differences developed where it was recorded for the copy that was actually in Ecbanata. But it's nice that the decree that's up in Ecbanata has that they were supposed to pay from the treasury. That's important because God is now going to do something that the Jewish community would have thought it was impossible. He's going to now turn this whole thing around and say, all right, not only will the adversaries have to stay away and let the Jews finish this, but all of you guys that complained in that whole area now, we're going to take from the royal revenues you would pay to the king, and we're going to let them use that money to build this temple. You guys are going to have to pay for this. And it's just amazing. You talk about God doing far more abundantly than we ask or think. You really watch that happen in this case. So therefore, he writes back the letter, and I can imagine the Jews listening to this letter, just dumbfounded. How could this possibly have ever happened? It's so much better than what they ever expected. But they find out that he says, look, you guys, all you guys beyond the river, you keep yourselves free from there. Get out of the way. Let the work of this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God on its site. And he makes a decree to these elders of the Jews. Whoops. Whoa, that wasn't so good. The joys. Hit the wrong button and that's what you get, right? Sorry about that. All right, so he makes this decree and he writes all these great things. And I could just imagine being in the audience at that point, and you just would have been shocked that such great news could actually come up. So as you continue on at verse 8 right there, let the cost be paid at the king's expense from the taxes on the region beyond the river. This is to be given immediately to these men so that they are not hindered. So it's not like we're going to wait a while. We're going to get going right away. And whatever they need, young bulls, rams, or lambs for the burnt offerings, for the God of heaven, everything they need to get this temple finished and to get it working, get it up and operating, you guys are going to have to provide. Let it be given to these people, whatever the priest requests, let it be given to them day by day without fail so that they can keep working, not stop, not worry about food. Let it be given to them so that the sacrifices may go up as a sweet aroma to the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons, which was pretty typical of what people would do back then. Those kings would want you to make sure that you prayed for the life of the king. But it's just unbelievable to watch how God can so quickly change everything. So is that our 5-minute warning? All right, well, this is going to be a quick class. So yeah, you thought I spoke fast before. Wait until you see how fast we can go. So it's just fun to watch. Look at what the angels did accomplish through the work of God, through the work of the angels, what God accomplished through the work of the angels at this point, far more abundantly than they could ever ask or imagine. So that's what they did. They built, and they built. And in 4 years, it's done. They had worked for 15 years. They had stopped for a while. And now 4 years later, the whole temple is finished. And they got it done, and they celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy in verse 16, right? You'll notice back up in verse 15, it says that it was finished by the command of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. This is the verse that causes the split in our Christadelphian community as to who in the world these kings are and whether or not you go all the way to Artaxerxes Longimanus, because they figure if Artaxerxes, king of Persia, was this Longimanus fella, that, well, that must mean that it's a lot later than we thought. But a lot of people have looked back at this and said, well, probably what was happening is that Darius was called Darius in one region. He was referred to by his title Artaxerxes in another region. And we only know that there were only 2 decrees written about the finishing of the work of the house of God. There's only 2. And the 2 are Cyrus and Darius. That's it. And so what Brother Mansfield did with this is he took that verse and he said, well, maybe we should reword that in the Hebrew. It can be in the days, it was by decree of Cyrus and by the decree of Darius, even Artaxerxes, because that's what a lot of you know him as. But those are the only 2 kings that we actually know that even made a decree about this, were those 2 kings. So the people, they celebrated with joy when it got done and they got the temple finished. But I do want you to notice as what happened here is then when in Ezra chapter 6 at verse 19, they kept the Passover. So the temple's finished now, they're ready to go. And now they keep the Passover on the 14th day of the first month because everybody's ready to go. But look who kept it in verse 21. Then the children of Israel who had returned from the captivity ate together with all those who had separated themselves from the filth of the nations of the land in order to seek the Lord God of Israel. Now that's worth underlining, boxing in, coloring, whatever you do in your Bible, because what does that mean? This was a witnessing project. They had actually influenced Gentiles from around this area to come and join, and they participated in the Passover, and they were now worshiping the Lord God of Israel. It doesn't say that if it's just about Jews. So this is what part of this whole project was about. God intended to build a house of prayer for all nations. And this is what was happening at this time. They were bringing people in from the outside, and they were coming and joining the community. Well, that's got good and bad to it, though, because as we're going to see at the end of this story in the exhortation, with that comes the risk that some of those outsiders aren't really committed. And they had to deal with the fact that, well, what do you do if the children are growing up and they don't even know how to speak Hebrew anymore because you brought in outsiders? So they did. They did all this stuff as they were supposed to do. And the lesson we want to take home from this today about this whole story is when we get back to work, those of us that have lagged in ecclesial life, got discouraged, you've gone off in projects of your own, worried about your own stuff and all that. This weekend is a time to get back into your family and your ecclesia. Spend time with them. Get to those activities, support them, start some new things for your ecclesia, whatever you think needs to be done, get back to work. And God promises, like Paul says in Philippians 1, that he's sure that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. All these things that we're experiencing today with COVID and all the rest of it are just challenges to see how committed are we? Is this really what we want? And God's doing that to see how we respond. And this weekend is a great opportunity to rethink some of those things we've got in our life and get back into our families, our ecclesias, and support the brotherhood. They're God's family. And you think if God's going to look at you and wonder, are you ready to join the angels? What he's going to look at is, what have you been doing with your life? It's a simple question. Where have we been spending our time? Have you been working with God's family? And why would he want to invite us into immortality if it's not something we want to do? This is the time, brothers and sisters, to get involved in ecclesial life, help and support one another, and God will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you. I forgot. My other laptop shuts off when I close the screen. All right, maybe.